Good afternoon, and welcome to the Magnet Client webinar about the conflict effect signals that we're going to look at through the Magnet platform, namely tracking exposure to international investors and international capital in your geography, in your industry using Magnet. Obviously, this comes within the context of the reports that we've published over the past couple of months surrounding the effects or the possible effects of the recent conflict in the MENA region, that being the Iran-Israel-US war, on the VC ecosystem. What does it mean for the VC ecosystem in terms of funding and the pressure points as a result of that conflict? So I'm just going to get started with the agenda that we're going to be following today is why does it matter? And we're going to get into it in a second. Just for the context, to put it all together before deep diving on the platform and seeing and tracking this particular signal with the international investors, and also the identifying these investors and looking at the patterns with these investors. Second, that we are going to go on the Magnet platform and to show you which tools you can use to actually do this. And we will also look at previous shocks and identify international investors who have, demonstrated that they have continued deploying during previous shocks, looking at them and identifying them in these previous periods, going into their profiles and investment portfolios. What kind of companies did they invest in, which stages, etc. How much did they invest? We're going to do that in the fourth part of this webinar. The last bit I will leave open to questions and a Q&A. So this is going to take around 30 minutes, maybe the last 15 minutes for a Q&A, and then we'll take it from there. So without further ado, we're going to go right into it. Why does it matter? Some of you may have attended the webinar by our CEO, Philip, I believe a couple of weeks ago. Some of you may have read our reports, our client exclusive reports on the situation. We have two reports about this. The first one being the scenarios, potential scenarios of the conflict and how they could affect MENA VC. And then the second report being the 5 pressure points, which is pretty much what this webinar deals with, the 5 pressure points affecting MENA VC. So just to kind of recap and to remind those of you attending, and also those who will watch the recording. By the way, this will be recorded, so those of you who haven't had the chance to attend can watch it later. There are 5 pressure points affecting MENA VC, given the conflict that has happened, even though it's now on a pause. We also talked about the fact that seeing the effects of this conflict on MENA VC will take about 6 to 9 months because of the lag effect, given that all of the deals that we're seeing right now, that we saw right now in Q1 and the beginning of Q2, are deals that have been in the pipeline and that have been signed or done during the last few months of 2025. Therefore, the decisions making that was affected is likely to affect deals from Q2 onwards, particularly more towards Q3 and Q4 2026. What are these 5 pressure points that we talked about? We talked about the oil-driven inflation pressures, how higher oil prices will create increased inflation expectations, delaying rate cuts and compressing venture valuations. We talked about interest rate expectations and what we keep calling the interest rates at the devil of venture capital, just because higher interest rates usually mean that investors might be less inclined to invest in VC, given that they will still be able to get some decent returns using other safer instruments or less risky instruments. And this is where this session comes in, which is the international investor risk perception. Because of the regional instability, because of these investors just being on the outside, them getting the perception of what is going on in the region from the media or from other sources, they may want to reconsider their investment decisions in the region. And there's a number of reasons for this, all the way from they don't want to invest in what they perceive to be a risky environment, all the way that they might have the choice of investing in another region that is deemed quote unquote safer, or investing in their local markets. Also, we talked about deal formation frictions and the travel constraints and how that will affect building pipelines and people attending events and so on. Also, investor risk aversion, it's basically linked specifically to international investors. But on international investor risk perception, and before we go on the platform, just to kind of recap why this matters specifically for MENA, is we've seen a growing share of international investors, that is, investors that are outside, are headquartered or based outside of the MENA region, investing in MENA region headquartered startups. So we're looking at approximately 44% of the capital deployed in 2024 came from international investors. That grew to about half, so 49% of investors in 2025 came from international sources, the 49% of deployed capital. So there's a growing share. We'll get to see that pattern in a bit and how it has changed. But if you actually go to how this has looked like over the past few years, we get to see a couple of things. We get to see that specifically it it encapsulates a larger percentage of the capital deployed when it comes to later stage rounds. So in early stage rounds, we're still seeing greater local investor participation. But in late stage rounds, so as we've seen with the Series B plus and the Series A capital deployment in the past 5 years, from 2021 to 2025, with the notable exception of 2023, that probably due to the increased interest rates and other factors, it can be seen that the international investors' capital constitutes a large portion of the invested capital into these Series A and Series B plus rounds. So these are the facts. This is what we have in terms of the data. Now, this is a general view. It looks at all of MENA. It doesn't give us a view of what's going on in a particular market. Some of our clients have noted that Saudi is less exposed to international investors because there is greater local participation. For example, the UAE has a larger international investor participation than some of the other markets in the region. But how can we look at that on the platform? And how can we track this, whether it's not just for a geography like the UAE or Saudi, but specifically an industry like fintech, edtech, e-commerce, or some of the other sectors that you're interested in, technologies like AI? How can we do this on the platform? So there's this very quick way of doing this on the platform. I'm going to stop sharing the presentation, and I will move straight to the platform right over here. And this is the Magnet platform. So once you log in, obviously some of you are familiar with the homepage, but what we will do now is we'll go straight to analytics, the analytics tool, which will let us actually look at these patterns, see where the investments are coming from for a particular geography or sector. For this, the first place that we will go to is the investor ranking section. And the title is not just about ranking, it's also about international investor evolution, which can be found in this tab. So if you go to the international investor evolution tab, this is pretty much you can recreate these charts we just saw earlier over here. Only difference being is that right over here, we've divided the investors' origin into regions. So obviously Middle East and North Africa will each have their own region in terms of investor origin. The other ones that we track, such as Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, will also have their own buckets of regions, and others, everything outside of that, will be into others. So that's where this is how it looks like on the platform. Now, let's kind of recreate what we saw earlier, and let's zoom in on a particular country or region. So first, this is by total percentage of investors, so unique investors. This can also be replicated, as mentioned, specifically for estimated deployed capital, which is what we saw earlier in the slides. But first and foremost, I will need to go to the region filter and under Startup Focus, and there I will select the Middle East and North Africa region. So this will give me what percentage of unique investors, based on their origin, invested in MENA, Middle East and North Africa startups during the period of 2021 to 2026. I'm going to exclude 2026, just given that the year isn't complete yet, but this is something that we can look at later. So on a year-on-year view, this is how it looks like. We can see that this is across all stages. We can see that it's about 50% in 2025, 46%, 48% in 2024, and so on. This is on a total in percentage of investors. Look, but if we go to estimated deployed capital, what we're seeing here is specifically what percentage of the deployed capital came from where. So this is how the pattern looks like. But let's say I want to do this for the UAE. And just given that some of the comments and feedback that we got earlier, obviously we did it for MENA, but the UAE would probably be exposed more to international investors, which is clearly the case, as you can see over here. So just adding a filter under filter by region, we had MENA first, then we went to country and we selected the UAE. This is on all stages level in terms of VC. You can clearly see that even during let's say the COVID recovery phase of 2021, we saw a larger portion of the investments being made into UAE startups coming from non-MENA sources, and this is very prominent in 2025. 75% of these investments came from outside of the UAE during this period. So basically, this is just a snapshot of that. You can actually go and export this offline. So you can export this as a CSV file, and it'll come as a CSV file. If you have any issues with opening the file, the format's not correct, you can just right-click, open with, and select Excel. It'll open it up. Or alternatively, you can open up your Excel file, and then open, and then select the file from where you downloads or desktop, or wherever you put it at. All these charts are exportable, as I mentioned, which helps us look at something like this. So I'm going to switch to Windows and actually show just a small example that I've done based on the data that we've pulled. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I'm going to switch over to my Excel. So we're going to get something that looks like this. Obviously, I've added my own MENA and then international based on the exports that I've done. It'll show what it's going to show when you export it is something like this. Middle East, with how much was deployed during this time, from specifically in 2021. We can see Middle East, North Africa, others, Southeast Asia, with the exact capital deployed number, with the estimate that we're giving. And you can then designate whether you want this region to be international or MENA or whatever. And then based on this, you are able to create a pivot table and also create this offline with your own charts. This is just one example of how you can use this. Now, how can we do it for a particular sector? And I'm going to go and then just share my screen on the platform again. I believe that would be sharing now. Yes, so we saw here UAE. So let's look at how this looks like for a particular sector in the UAE. We can do it by industry. So let's say we're doing it for fintech, and let's see how different this would be. So for fintech, again, there's a general pattern of a larger portion of it actually being done by international investors, with a notable exception of 2022, where a lot of the capital came from regional or local sources in the MENA region. I'm going to go again and just put it back and as all industries. Then we can also see another example of this by doing it by technology type. As a reminder, to those attending, technologies on MAGNiTT are viewed differently than industries. Industries are verticals. Technologies such as AI, cloud computing, networking and 5G, VR, blockchain, Web3, these are viewed across all industries. So if you want to take a look at the percentage, for example, of how exposed is the AI technology startups in the UAE to international capital, then this would be a good way to look at it. So you go by technology type. I will select AI and machine learning, and I'm going to see how this has changed. So we can see that in 2023 and 2025, most recently 2025, a large portion of the investments that came into the AI technology startups within the UAE have come from international sources. And then obviously in 2022, these investments, I mean, weren't there. It was a much smaller number. And then also in 2024. So we can see the patterns of that going forward. You can even expand it and even include AI enabled if you want to have a broader view, for example, and so on and so forth. And we can see that. Now, just resetting all the filters, let's take a look at Saudi. And I think that's be another good example to do, given that based on the data that we have, Saudi is less exposed to international capital. And we can then also do it by stage to see where the late stage exposure comes in and how that shifts over time. So again, I'm just going to go to startup focus. I'm going to select Saudi Arabia from the countries here. Then estimated capital deployed over time. I'm just going to remove 2026. Much smaller than the UAE. So in the UAE, we were seeing values close to 50%, 40% every year. Here, we're seeing smaller values in terms of estimated capital deployed into Saudi startups from international capital, with a larger portion being done by local or regional investors. But this is on a general scale, so all stages. But if we want to do it for a particular stage, let's say we want to do it for early stage, I would go to deal criteria, filter by funding stage, and I will select pre-seed, seed, and for example, pre-series A. Smaller percentages even coming from outside the region in terms of capital being deployed into Saudi startups. But what if I go here and then select later stages? Let's look at Series A, for example. Larger percentages in 2022 and 2025, 2024 somewhat. But then if we go on, just like we did with the slides that you've seen, Series B plus, so B, C, D, E, and F. We can see that obviously in 2022, we can see that happening there as well, and also in 2025. So in general, we can see that specifically the later stages are overall more exposed to international capital in general. In Saudi, a bit less so, but in general, these are the patterns that we're seeing. I mean, even if we go to the same criteria and we select MENA again in terms of the regions, we can see that with the notable exception of 2023, that's also quite significant amount of capital or percentage of capital coming from abroad for the later stages Series B plus. The second point that I want to move on to is identifying the top investors right now, maybe for the past year, but also putting it into the context of who were the top international investors during times of previous shocks like COVID. So first of all, let's look at who are the top international investors in 2025, for example, in MENA that came from non-MENA regions, and see also who were those investors in 2021 or 2020 to 2021, which was when during the COVID shock. So first off, I need to go to investor ranking again. I will go into the top investors breakdown. Following that, I will just take a look here at the list, and I will look at obviously top number of investments. We can look at the top 20, for example, just to get a bigger list. Another thing that I can do as well is I want to look at the startup focus. Let's look at MENA as an example, and then we can narrow it down to a particular country. The investor region should be non-MENA, so we need to deselect MENA here. And then for the time frame, let's just select 2025, which is the last year. And you can see quite a bit of familiar names. We can see Orbit Ventures in Singapore, 500 Global, Antler, Endeavor Catalyst, along with some of the estimated capital deployed. If you actually arrange that by estimated capital deployed, you're able to see a lot of names that you might have heard of as well. Opportunity Ventures, CVC Capital Partners from Hong Kong, Luxembourg, Cayman Islands, etc. So these are the geographies at which they come from. If I were to go ahead and zoom in on a particular sector, let's say in fintech, what does this look like? I can just, again, very similar to what we did earlier with the international investor capital deployed distribution. You can just go to primary industry here and select fintech. And how does this look like in fintech? You will see it's like different numbers. Blue Pool Capital, these that was the Tabby deal, Wellington Management, Pantera, QED Investors, so on and so forth. But let's take a look on how this would look like in 2021 and where were these investors and where did they come from and what did they invest to, which is also, I think, another interesting thing to check out to know what kind of startups were receiving this kind of funding during such periods. I'm just going to put back the industry filter. We do have MENA in place. And let's just go back to the period of 2020 to 2021 with COVID and the post-COVID shock that I was experiencing at the time. So if you look at the same exact region, which is MENA, we can see that these were the top investors by the capital deployed. You have OLX Group, SoftBank, Island Investment Corp, Nextplay Capital, so on and so forth. Names from the Netherlands, Japan, the US, quite a lot of American investors here as well. But let's also see the number of investments, and that also gives us an idea what kind of investors were they. So we can see very similarly that yes, it was also the American Investor 500 Global, followed by Global Founders Capital, Y Combinator, and we can see the number of investments there. We can also see what kind of investors they were, as in are they a VC, are they an accelerator? That can be done also with the investors breakdown. So if I just expand this, I still have the same filters on. I can see that most of them are VCs, followed by investment companies, corporate asset managers, etc. And then most of them are actually coming from the US, followed by the UK, France. This is from outside the MENA region. So these are the numbers that we're getting for outside of the MENA region. Going, and again, by the way, you can export this offline to create these charts offline and get the exact numbers and not just the percentages if you wish to do so as part of your own analysis. So I'm going to head back to the top investors section. And one of the things that I will do as well is actually I'm going to look at later stages. So under investor focus or deal criteria, what I'm going to do is I want to see who was investing in late stage during this period. Let's say Series A plus. So Series A, B, C, D, and there is no pre-Series B. Well, there is a pre-Series B, E and F during this period, and see what we will get. So we have 500 Global, Endeavor Catalyst, Global Founders Capital, 40X Ventures, Jimco. These are the ones we're investing in the later stage capital. And even if you do it by estimated capital deployed, you will see also similar the ones we invested in there, the larger ticket sizes during this period. So that's on identifying the top investors that have invested during previous shocks. Again, you can do this for a particular stage like we just did right now. So this is Series A plus. Or you can do it for your industry or the technology type that you're monitoring that would be relevant to you. And then you can see what these investments were. Now, how or what were these investments during that period? So there's a couple of ways to do this. So I can either go back to the directories. This is where we have all the database of investors and startups from that time period. And we can go and maybe I have a particular interest in investors from the United States, and I can see that. So I can go to the directories and go to startups. I can see what were the deals that happened during this period involving American investors or non-MENA investors. I can simply go to edit filters on the top right-hand side. Then I will go and select MENA in my demographics. So where the investments happen is into MENA startups. Then in funding information, I will select the investment date to be from, let's say, from March 2020, which is kind of around when the COVID pandemic peaked, to around December 2021. And then I would choose the instrument. Usually by default, we're looking at equity. Obviously, at Magnet, we look at equity transactions mostly and the PE growth. We'll look at verified funding by Magnet as well. And then based on this, we can go at investor country and select USA. And then we'll be able to see what were those rounds that were invested in by American investors during this time period. Um, while it loads, these are the ones actually. So you can see Halan, I think a lot of you are familiar with that name. Wigo, Kitopi, etc. These were the startups. But if you go to the funding view, you can actually see what those rounds were. And these were the actual rounds. Again, this can also be exported offline. So you can save the search. You can also export it offline to take this data offline to do your own analysis. But if you move on the right-hand side, you can see how those investors were. Tiger Global Management. You can see some of these investors. Obviously, there's some mixed pools, so not necessarily you'll get only the American investors here. It's just the rounds in which the American investors participated in, as an example. This is one way to do it. You can even get a chart view of this when it loads over the investments over this particular time frame, and you can also export it as well. The last thing that I will do as well is if we go back to the international investors list, let's for example check out as an example 500 Global, which is based in the US, or any other investor that caught your attention based on their investment patterns or based on what they invested in or based on just their participation during a certain time period. I'm going to take one investor as an example. I would say 500 Global, but I want to look um, at a more relevant example just here from like Tiger Global Management, which is an investment company based in the United States. Yeah, exactly. So right over here, it tells us a bit more about this investor, where they're based, how many companies they have in their active portfolio. Obviously, they're a US-based investment company. This ticket sizes range between 16.7K to 150 million based on estimated ticket size. If we're tracking any of their funds or LPs, or in this case not, the total number of investments as well, and how many exits they've had. Also, we can see their capital deployed, estimated capital deployed, the median deal size, the ticket size range, and the median valuation range of whatever they've invested in, and their active portfolio, what's their trailing 12 months of investments, so no recent investments. I guess they haven't really invested in the countries that we tracked recently. And when their first investing year was, a breakdown of what they usually invest in. We can see that they mostly do Series B, C, like well, late stage, and mostly in transport logistics, fintech, and e-commerce, and also geographic distribution of what they've done. But because we're interested in MENA in particular, we can just go to the investments tab here, and we can see where they've invested. So let's take a look at, for example, region. We can select Middle East. And let's select the year that we're interested in, which was, let's say, 2021. So this only have one investment in 2021, but in 2020, we can also see what they've done in North Africa and all the other regions. So again, you can actually go and check their deal directory. So let's say you go to look at Tiger's investments. And if you want to add a MENA filter, you can actually do that. And you can see what these rounds were, what these companies were, where they invested, and you can see how much they've invested in each. Well, what the rounds that they were in that they participated in, and also the funding view for these companies as well. Obviously, you saw Souk here in earlier before they got acquired, Tarabut Gateway, Access Pay Thunder, and Silk Group. Just an example. You can put any investor there and you'll be able to get the investments that they made within that region. You can go it from their page, or you can do it here from the directory just by going to edit filters, and then under demographics, and just put Middle East and North Africa. Keyword search, you just type the investor's name, and you can type the time frame in which these investments happen under investment date, and then you can get that. One of the things that we are working on improving is assigning these investments not just to the investor or the GP in this case, but also in an LP-GP structure. So you'll be able to see it under a fund, for example. Which fund was this startup funded by, rather than just the GP or the fund manager? So this is something that's coming in the near future with the features that we're working on, in addition to further information that you're going to see on the investor page compared to what I've just shown you now. In fact, just a quick look to remind everyone of some of the information that we've added, I think would be helpful when you're looking at investors, is some of the other things that you mentioned. So this is a good example because they have funds, they have funds raised, they have number of LPs, exits, a trailing 12 months of investment, similar information to what we saw earlier. But the list of their investments, you can also see if this was like, for example, a follow-on round. So in the context of international investor investing in a time of crisis, you'll be able to look at and see, well, when there was a follow-on round, this was the second time that they invested or the third time that they invested, they must be very invested in this company or an industry sector or geography. There's some other insights that you can see. And if you're interested in a startup, you can just click on the page here and you'll be able to go to its profile and understand more about that startup and its funding history, as well as the co-investors who invested with this investor. So just to kind of recap, in terms of what we've covered today is particularly using the advanced analytics tool and investor ranking, looking at and applying the particular filters that would be relevant to your geography, industry, or stage, seeing how much international capital has contributed to the funding of that stage, industry, or geography to understand how exposed is that sector, stage, or geography to international capital. Then again, we went on investor ranking, but under top investors, we looked to identify who those international investors were in that particular period. We also went back and took a look at what happened during the COVID shock or the post-COVID shock, and looked at those investors and what they invested in. And then from their profile or from the directories, you can go and use their name as the investor or from their profile to identify what were those rounds that they invested in during that period, what kind of industries they were, what kind of stages, what kind of companies were they, and so on and so forth to see who still invested during that period or who took advantage of certain market conditions to make the right kind of investments. I'm going to leave this for questions now, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take it from there. I'm just going to see how to open a Q&A. So I've opened the Q&A for people to be able to ask questions. If anyone wants to ask any questions for the next 10 minutes, I'll be more than happy to answer these questions. Okay. So we've received a question about basically how can you access this feature? You don't have access to this. Yeah, so this is advanced analytics, what I showed you at the beginning. This is a feature that is accessible if you have the Magnet subscription, you have the right features, which is advanced analytics. In case you have any questions, you can just reach out to me afterwards as your account manager with a question on advanced analytics. Another question that I saw also is can we export the table of the top investors? So at the moment, no, you cannot export tables. It's actually the only thing in advanced analytics that you cannot export as a chart, as a table, is the actual table of the investors. So you can try copy pasting it from there or manually copying it over. But it is something also that we're working on to make it exportable in the future. Just going to check further questions. There's someone asked, is there a limit to how much you can export? So it depends. Let me share my screen to answer that question. I'll basically be able to show you. But yes, very good question. Just gonna share my window again. Um, so when you export from the directories, let's say, I'm looking at taking 500 globals example, you are limited when you export from here, and you want to export, like, for example, a particular investor, a region, etc., the deal level data or the startup level data. Yes, you are limited to a certain number of lines per month per your subscription. Any unused lines get carried over into the next month, and so on and so forth. That's the deal level data, Excel with every single element that you see here that will be there on the Excel, all the way from the valuation to the amount invested to all of that. That there is a limit on this. However, if you go to back to analytics and let's say we want to export the investor ranking, international investor evolution, or any chart for that matter, if you have access to advanced analytics, you can export this as many times as you like. Those of you who have a custom product from Magnet, a custom analytics dashboard, you're also able to export. And those who do not, who just have access to advanced analytics, they can also export from here in an unlimited manner. Because again, what you're getting is just basically a chart, kind of like a chart. So I'm just going to export this and show you what it looks like. It's a CSV file that's basically a table that looks pretty much takes the numbers from the charts and transcribes them so that you don't have to copy them manually. I'm going to just share this in a second. I just downloaded the file. You can do this as many times as you like, as long as you have access to advanced analytics, you're able to do this. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen from here and then just switch to that window, and I'll be able to show that to you in a second, which is this. It's going to look exactly like this, which is what I kind of showed you earlier, but that was for estimated capital deployed. This is for number of unique investors per region. So pretty much that chart, I put it in. I can create my own pivot table or whatever with this and then take it from there. Any other questions? Also got a question about the upcoming reports that we're doing. If we're doing anything industry specific. Yes, so we have a report coming out, I believe, in the next few weeks, about how certain sectors, will be affected or may be affected by uh, the situation in the region. Don't have exactly what we're going to cover, but it has to do with industries and also how differently they are affected by the ongoing situation in the region. Just gonna give it one more minute for questions, and then kind of like a one final thing that I want the audience to note of what we have coming next. No more questions. So one thing I wanted to note is we want to make this a series of webinars. We want to also let you know that not next week, this is going to happen on the 6th of May, which is a Wednesday. We will be doing our next webinar around the same time. You will get the details, everyone who attended, and we'll send out emails and on the WhatsApp channel and all of these things. We're going to look at the different use cases for doing due diligence, VC due diligence using Magnet and using the features available on Magnet, and also looking at investor profiles. There are a lot of additions, relevant additions, I would say, that are coming to investor profiles by that time. That we'll be glad to show you how to use them, the different use cases when it comes to you doing due diligence using Magnet as part of your due diligence process, particularly for VCs and investors. And we'll be very happy to take you through that. We'll be sending out emails with the registration details. As a last point, thanks to everyone who attended today, who is watching this recording, as well as everyone who asked questions. And if you have any follow-ups, just please reach out by WhatsApp, by email, habib@magnet.com. You already have my details. And if you do not, just send sales@magnet.com an email, and we'll be happy to get you connected to me. And any feedback, any further questions, other topics that you want to see in webinars for our clients in the next few weeks, please do let us know. But yeah, just know we're doing due diligence with Magnet, using Magnet next in a couple of weeks on the 6th of May. I appreciate all of you for attending and wish you a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.